Many people feel shaken after leaving a faith or experiencing harm in a religious community. And today we're going to be talking about just that, the lasting effects of religious trauma syndrome. I'd like to note that RTS is not a judgment of faith itself, but a way to describe harmful experiences some people endure. For example, one survivor describes leaving her church as taking away her certainty. Never have I experienced such confusion, pain, grief, loss, fear, anxiety, all because of religion, faith, and a higher power. In light of that, this episode will explain RTS clearly, share real stories, expert insights, and coping tools. Welcome back to another Broken Podcast. I'm Nick Taylor. Today we're going to take a look at what religious trauma syndrome is, how it affects us, and what we can do to handle this challenging mental health phenomenon. See, spirituality is a large fundamental property for strong and stable mental health. But what happens when it is weaponized against us? Unfortunately, for many people, this is a reality that they have had to face. The community that gives them strength and focus for their spiritual well-being may turn against them, alienate them, villainize them, or even worse. In the most treacherous events, abusers will find solace in these communities strictly to prey on victims within the sanctity of their spiritual communities. Just to reiterate, this episode is by no means to attack, demean, or denounce any form or fashion of practicing religion. Rather, to give voice and understanding to what religious trauma syndrome is and the lasting impacts that it has on people. RTS refers to the cluster of lasting emotional and mental health effects experienced by people after growing up in or leaving an authoritarian or abusive religion. Psychologist Dr. Marlene Wintle, who coined the term back in 2011, describes RTS as what people face when leaving an authoritarian, dogmatic religion and coping with the damage of indoctrination. In other words, RTS is trauma from both prolonged religious control and then the upheaval of suddenly leaving that world. It's like a double trauma. First, the harm of extreme teachings, then the shock of losing the only life you knew. Wintle says it can be compared to a combination of PTSD and complex PTSD. In practical terms, a person might re-experience scary childhood teachings like nightmares of punishment, avoid anything reminding them of their past faith, or feel constantly on edge. Classic trauma reactions. An Indian psychiatry journal notes that therapists typically call severe RTS cases religion-induced PTSD or CPTSD. Why name it? Giving these experiences a name can reduce shame and isolation. Wintle compares it to how naming anorexia as a disorder helped sufferers realize they weren't crazy. One professional notes RTS isn't in DSM or ICD codes, so psychologists often treat it under PTSD or CPTSD labels. As trauma researcher Beth Alford explains, RTS arises from an environment of captivity that erodes a person's sense of self. After leaving, people often report feeling lost and powerless. Marlene Wintle found core issues including fear, anger, depression, loss of self, and difficulty making decisions. Hallmarks of trauma. As we can see, RTS stems from a similar place regardless of the walk of faith someone follows. The overwhelming feelings while being a part of the organization and the wave of emotions once separating are a common enough issue that it was given a name and recognition throughout the professional mental health community. The biggest takeaway here is that no matter how lonely it feels to experience RTS, there are enough people experiencing the weight of it that it has been recognized for the last 14 years. You are far from alone, no matter how much it feels that way. Religious trauma syndrome can affect mind, body, and life routines. Symptoms vary, but common patterns include these. Cognitive confusion. Many people describe feeling foggy or indecisive. They recall being taught black and white thinking and now struggle to make simple decisions or trust their own judgment. As one survivor confessed, "I feel in total crisis. No confidence in my own decision making after leaving faith." People often question, who am I if I can't use the beliefs I was taught? Emotional distress. Anxiety and depression are very common. Listeners might relate to panic attacks, chronic anxiety, or deep saddening and grief. For example, one person wrote that her faith filled me with fear, paralyzed me with anxiety, and even annihilated my self-identity. Guilt and shame also surface for doubting or failing the faith's rules. Psychologists note feelings of shame, self-hatred, hypervigilance, and perfectionism often accompany RTS. These are similar to PTSD symptoms. Functional and physical issues. Trauma can disrupt sleep and eating. Nightmares, often replays of religious imagery, insomnia, or oversleeping may happen. Some people experience somatic symptoms like unexpected aches or weakness, or overall health anxiety. Others report changes in appetite or weight. In the long term, some develop anxiety disorders, depression, PTSD, or addictive behaviors, whether it be substance misuse or compulsive behaviors. There could be social and cultural effects. Losing a faith community often means losing friends and family support. This creates isolation. Tasks like sharing meals or holidays can become fraught with guilt or stress. Many feel like a fish out of water in mainstream society. An Indian Psychiatry Journal letter describes being unfamiliar with mainstream culture among RTS symptoms. Developmentally, some adults were sheltered and find themselves emotionally or socially behind their peers. For example, they might feel awkward about dating or have educational gaps in knowledge like science or arts, which can fuel anxiety or low self-esteem. In their own words, survivors often compare leaving religion to a profound loss. One person said, "For many people who leave their faith, it's like a death or divorce, like losing a lover, a parent, or best friend who has always been there." Another confessed, "I feel in total crisis, panicked and terrified of facing the future alone." This raw testimony highlights the intense fear and loneliness someone may feel. And in extreme situations, RTS has been linked with suicidal thoughts or attempts due to overwhelming despair. And tragically, there are even rare cases of violence. This underscores that RTS can be as serious as other traumas and deserves compassion and attention. As with any psychological condition, the effects and intensity of those effects are individual to each person. And because religious trauma syndrome can stem from one or more type of traumatic event within a religious community, there is a lot to unpack when confronting it. I can attest from personal accounts shared with me, things that I've witnessed myself, case studies that are out there to read for personal research, and testimony from influencers that focus on this specific trauma on their platform. The trauma that is experienced covers all the bases: mental, physical, psychological, sexual, manipulation, you name it, and it has been part of someone's religious trauma syndrome testimony. There is another creator that definitely gives these stories a voice like no other, and that is Jubilee Dawn. She's an influencer that brings so much light to this topic on TikTok, and now she's expanding to the podcast area herself with her new podcast, Heel Dish, where she goes through the journey of escaping an abusive relationship while being part of a cult. And she's starting a new podcast soon called The Overshare Hour, where she is going to continue to shed light on the stories that hide in the dark shadows of the church. If this is a topic that you want to further dive into, I highly recommend giving her a listen. To illustrate and understand the effects of RTS, let's briefly share some case study stories. The names in these stories have been anonymized for the privacy of the victims, but these are real accounts from real people. Anna's story as an ex-evangelical. Anna grew up in a strict church where questioning was forbidden. As a teen, she began to doubt some teachings. The result was overwhelming guilt and anxiety. After she finally left the church in college, Anna felt as if she had lost her entire identity. She remembers laying awake at night, heart pounding, and replaying sermons about sin. Eventually, with therapy, she realized her panic attacks were linked to those deep fears. Dr. Winnell quotes one ex-evangelical saying, "Evangelism took my childhood, filled me with fear, paralyzed me with anxiety. reflecting Anna's internal experience herself. Anna eventually joined a support group of ex-evangelicals, which helped her see that she wasn't alone. Then there's Farad. He was raised in a devout Muslim family. Questioning faith was taboo. When Farad began to leave Islam, his family disowned him, so he became isolated from his loved ones. He described grieving the living, mourning relationships with his family as if they had died. The stress caused severe insomnia and panic. He also lived under the fear of community retaliation because in some countries apostasy is forbidden. Mental health professionals note that in some contexts, leaving Islam is a punishable offense, leading to threats of violence or even death. Farad's trauma was compounded by this reality. He eventually found an online ex-Muslim counseling community and began therapy to heal his grief and learn coping skills. Leah grew up in ultra-Orthodox Judaism, where everything secular was off limits. No TV, no internet, certain music wasn't allowed, or history. When she decided to leave, she likened it to boarding a one-way rocket. Her entire world changed overnight. Leah's family and friends stopped speaking to her. She suddenly had to navigate this new daily life, like reading the news and driving cars that she had never learned. An organization for people like Leah says those who leave such communities face a treacherous and often heartbreaking journey. Leah struggled with severe depression and worthlessness at first, but found support through Footsteps, a group helping ex-ultra-Orthodox. They helped her learn everyday skills and how to deal with the loss. Each of these examples shows different backgrounds, but common themes: intense fear and guilt from indoctrination, profound loss after leaving, and gradual recovery with support. A key takeaway from this is something I just want to reiterate again. You are far from alone, no matter how much you feel it. I myself have deconstructed, and being from a family that is predominantly Southern Baptist, I know how isolating it feels personally. I know that my thoughts, feelings, and opinions are so vastly different from my extended family's that I actively avoid the conflict of it. But through my experiences in life, including a trip to the Middle East and my own personal accounts from various religious bodies, I have grown and formed my own view of things. One of those being that I have not lost faith in spirituality, but I have lost faith in the church itself. So let's take a look at how it manifests across different religions. A key point, just to reiterate again, religious trauma syndrome is not limited to one religion or one culture. It can happen in any belief system that is highly controlling or authoritarian. The core is not the faith itself, but how it is practiced. So let's take a look at these. Christianity. Many stories from the evangelical or fundamentalist context, like the one we just talked about, where doctrines can instill fear like hell and divine punishment. Leaving such communities often triggers RTS symptoms. But not all Christians have this. We're talking about extreme environments. Islam. As noted, apostasy, which is leaving faith, in Islam carries severe consequences in some practices. Even if not facing legal punishment, ex-Muslims often face family rejection and community pressure. The fear of eternal damnation or punishment can be part of their trauma narrative too. Judaism. Ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities are tight-knit with strict rules. Leaving may mean being cut off from family and culture, like in Leah's case. And just like Farhad and Anna, these individuals experience a profound identity and community loss, leading to anxiety and depression. And it happens in other faiths too. Similar patterns occur when individuals leave conservative branches of Hinduism, Scientology, Jehovah's Witnesses, the list goes on. In each case, it's controlling, punitive practices that create trauma, not the religion in general. A broad sociological study explicitly noted it did not isolate one particular faith. It surveyed people from many religions, mostly Christians, since that's common in the US, But the psychological phenomenon cuts across faiths. The psychologist's definition of religious trauma syndrome itself mentions authoritarian, dogmatic, controlling religious groups and belief systems in general. One of the things that I'd like to stress is that most religious communities are loving and helpful for members, but when any religion becomes authoritarian, it can cause harm. I personally encourage respect for believers while acknowledging that some institutions do harm individuals. When experts are researching this, they emphasize looking at power control dynamics rather than targeting a specific religion. One trauma therapist says RTS involves captivity and psychological domination. This happens in extreme sects of any religion. It's the control, not the belief, that creates the trauma. But because this phenomenon is so widespread and it crosses so many barriers, there are expert insights and research on this from all angles. As I mentioned, Dr. Winnell, who was the first one to define RTS, has spent decades working with former fundamentalists, noting symptoms like confusion, anxiety, and identity loss. Trauma specialists draw parallels to betrayal trauma. The betrayal after leaving a religion can shatter basic assumptions about the world. Many clinicians now advocate for recognizing RTS to guide treatment. So let's hear some of the things from those experts. Marlon Winnell has a very vivid quote highlighting the extreme end of RTS. It underscores how intense it feels, though the phrase is graphic. In an NBC News interview, Winnell described severe RTS as basically a mind rape, and those were her words. Martin Roseman, a longtime researcher, observed that a great number of people have been traumatized rather than uplifted by their early religious training. He believes harmful religious training is a major under-recognized cause of illness. His words reinforce that clinicians are seeing these patterns in their practice. Many therapists have recommended a trauma-informed approach when confronting religious trauma syndrome. This might include cognitive behavioral therapy to challenge irrational beliefs like guilt and black and white thinking, and techniques from PTSD treatments like grounding and safe visualization. Coaches and counselors specializing in RTS often say that validating is the first step, making sure that you know that your feelings are real, because many survivors have been told that they're overreacting. There's been a lot of research findings in the last 10 years as well. The phenomenon is now being studied scientifically. A 2023 sociological survey of 1,500 U.S. adults concluded that about 27 to 33% of them have experienced religious trauma in their lives. That is roughly 1 in 3 Americans. Even more striking, 10 to 15% of adults are still actively struggling with significant RTS symptoms right now. The authors note these are conservative estimates. They also report that 90% of those aware of someone with religious trauma syndrome know at least one person, up to 10, who seems to suffer. In short, RTS is common in society, even if it is rarely talked about. With all that being said, it is true that RTS isn't an official disorder, and some skeptics urge more research. But publications like the Industrial Psychiatry Journal note the parallels to PTSD and call for greater awareness. The idea is gaining traction among therapists, and as Beth Alford puts it, religious trauma is definitely something that is bringing harm to a great deal of people. My own experience with this is both first and third-hand perspectives, and I'm just going to give you some snippets of it, because it is a long story. I watched things happen that didn't seem abnormal at the time. It's funny how they make things seem so normal in these situations, isn't it? I watched youth leaders in their late 20s waiting on youth members to graduate. I was chastised and excluded due to purity culture and my blatant disagreements with it. And when I joined the military at 17, I was no longer allowed to attend the youth group after that. All while youth leaders and volunteers were dating someone who was a student 3 months ago, not to mention the over a decade age gap. My first-hand account, on the other hand, was one that felt more like extortion, if I had to put a label on it. While all of that was going on during my time in youth group, which was going on simultaneous to this, I was also a volunteer in the children's ministry. I created a unique series with reoccurring characters that tied into the VBS program, but were part of the children's ministry both before and after VBS. It was my own unique and creative spin to not only get and keep the kids engaged, but also make a bit of that magic of VBS carry on for the kids for a few weeks after. These series would last in 6-month cycles. A couple of months before VBS happens, and a couple of months after VBS. And then I would even include it with things like the Christmas service, and I would execute it just the same way. I would figure out on my own each week how to make it tie into the church's lesson plan and everything. I had impressed the head of the children's ministry. My supervisor was leaving her position soon, and I did not just want her job, I was offered and groomed to take over it. I kept cranking out more of these skits and investing more time because I was under the impression that I was going to be taking her place. One day, after doing almost 2 years of this volunteering, the head of the children's ministry took me to lunch just to tell me that I would not be getting the job. They had hired somebody from out of state. In the time that I was learning that position, I was performing the tasks of a paid employee for free as a volunteer, all along believing it was in preparation for the start of my career that I had not asked for but was offered to me. Looking back now, especially through a different lens that can see through the facade, I can see how I was manipulated and extorted for my talents. I was one of the lucky ones whose youth group story was not one of sexual assault, but unfortunately that wasn't the case for peers I knew from other places. Remember, 1 in 3 Americans has a story of their own. Recovering from religious trauma syndrome can be a long process, but experts and survivors have recommended some practical tools and coping strategies that do work. The first of those being seek trauma-informed therapy. A skilled therapist can help unpack the pain. Cognitive behavioral therapy is often used to challenge harmful beliefs learned in religion and build new thinking patterns. Therapists might also use EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, to process specific traumatic memories, or use narrative therapy to rebuild a personal story. Therapy can provide validation, realizing these reactions are normal responses to trauma. Support groups and community. Finding others who've been through similar experiences can be healing. Peer support groups, online or in person, for ex-believers can offer understanding and advice. For example, Recovering from Religion is an internal organization that offers peer support and professional resources for people leaving faith. Its mission is hope, healing, and support for those doubting or leaving religion. There's also the divorcing religion community and forums like ex-evangelical or ex-Muslim groups. A specialist coach notes that joining a support group provides validation and a sense of community, which helps counter the loss of your religious community. Practicing self-care and mindfulness. Survivors are encouraged to practice self-care to soothe the nervous system. This can include mindful meditation, breathing exercises, yoga, or gentle exercise, anything that grounds you in the present. Mindfulness apps or trauma worksheets can help manage anxiety. Setting healthy boundaries, like limiting contact with toxic family members or avoiding triggering conversations, is crucial. There's education and rebuilding that can be done as well. Learning about religious trauma syndrome helps put experiences in perspective. Reading books like Leaving the Fold by Marilyn Winnell or memoirs of other ex-believers can be empowering. Knowledge can replace shame. Education also means catching up on the information gaps you might have in science, history, and culture. Taking community college classes or watching documentaries helps connect you to the broader world, reducing that fish out of water feeling. Creative expression. Journaling your feelings, writing, poetry, or art can be therapeutic. One tactic a therapist might encourage is to write letters that you don't even send to the people who hurt you to express your anger or grief safely. In extreme cases where there's threats or violence after leaving, you need to know your rights. The context varies by country, but organizations like Ex-Muslims of North America or Footsteps, which is ex-Orthodox Jews, offer specialized advice and resources to your situation. If you've experienced abuse, also reach out to general abuse hotlines or local support services. There are hotlines that are specific for RTS as well. Recovering from Religion provides helplines in the United States. 1-844-I-DOUBT-IT or 844-436-2848 is just one of those helplines, and there is an international number, and it is on their website. These hotlines are staffed by trained volunteers who've been through similar journeys. There's also Spirit Rock Mindfulness Center in San Francisco, which offers mindfulness and exiting belief support groups. If professional help is needed, look for therapists who are secular or trauma specialized. The Religious Trauma Institute offers training for clinicians. That training was co-founded by Dr. Laura Anderson. You can search online directories for religious trauma therapists or trauma-informed therapists that are in your area. One of the biggest parts of any healing journey is patience and hope. You need to remember that healing takes time. It may feel like moving slowly out of a dark tunnel, but many survivors report that after months or years, they feel relief and personal growth. Befriending uncertainty and redefining meaning are gradual parts of recovery, ones that everyone experiences. It does take time, but it does get easier as time goes by. Remember that no matter how lost things feel, with support and self-care, people do recover. Many build fulfilling lives outside of their old faith. One of the things to remember is that with community and therapy, it is always possible to move towards a brighter future after religious trauma syndrome. Before we wrap up, there are a couple things I wanted to shed some light on with this topic. There are people out there who literally feel trapped in the dogma. Not that long ago, I was talking about my own journey with religion, and I brought up questioning the church. A viewer came to me with the genuine question of, we are allowed to do that? The answer is yes, you can and should question everything, because you're entitled to the answers in order to formulate your own individual beliefs. The only reason I can personally see that someone would turn down questions, make you feel guilty for asking them, or twist that into a skewed path towards damnation is if it threatens the controlling grip that they have on you, which is something I have not only observed firsthand, but it has also resounded multiple times from multiple sources throughout my own personal research. Dogmatic authoritarian control by means of fear-mongering and imminent damnation are not concepts that are brought on by a loving spiritual higher power, but are rather concepts created by man. I can undoubtedly see the defined lines myself where man has contorted something that was intended to be beautiful for personal gain and power over others. Leaving the church or religion doesn't necessarily mean leaving your system of beliefs, but sometimes it is necessary for your mental health or even personal safety. And from what I've learned researching multiple of the most practiced religions worldwide, none of them intend for the religion or church to harm you. And if they have, I am willing to be the voice that is here to tell you, it is not only okay for you to get the help that you deserve, but you also deserve to feel safe and loved. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Another Broken Podcast. If this episode resonates with you, share it with someone that might need to hear it as well. Feel free to reach out to us by email at brokenmedia1984@gmail.com, on TikTok under the username AnotherBrokenDad, or by just commenting on this episode. Whatever way, you know that I'd love to hear from you. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day and whatever's in the rest of the week ahead. Until next time, I'm Nick Taylor. Have a good one, guys.